name is Harold Davis. I'm here to teach you about the art and craft of digital photography.
Good morning. Happy September, and thank you for tuning into our webinar today, The Solace of Nature. Welcome to the Harold Davis Studio in Berkeley, California. This webinar is about the solace of nature, landscape photography, and the creative energy that we can find when we're out in the natural world. In this webinar, noted photographers William Neill and Harold Davis present work from their recent books. Bill's book is Light on the Landscape, and Harold's book is Creative Garden Photography. Both books are published by Rocky Nook. After the presentation, Bill and Harold will discuss the influence of nature on their work and lives and answer questions from the audience. Many of you know who Harold and Bill are, but if you're joining us for the first time today, here's a little bit more about them. Harold Davis is the developer of a unique technique for photographing flowers for transparency, the creator of multi-raw processing and hand HDR processing. He is a Moab master and a Zeiss ambassador. Harold is an internationally known photographer and a sought-after workshop leader, and his website is digitalfieldguide.com. Our special guest today, Bill Neill, is a landscape photographer concerned with conveying the deep, spiritual beauty he sees and feels in nature. Bill's award-winning photography has been widely published in books, magazines, calendars, posters, and his limited edition prints have been collected and exhibited in museums and galleries nationally. Bill received a BA degree in environmental conservation at the University of Colorado. In 1995, Bill received the Sierra Club's Ansel Award for conservation photography. His website is williamneill.com. So hi, guys. Good to see you.
Hello, greetings everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am going to be talking about my book mostly. I'm going to go right into sharing my screen. Just give me a second to get that set up. I'm going to just start out with a few points about the book and about my background before I get into the images. Here's a photograph of Ansel and myself in about 1980. I used to have a red beard, but deep down inside, I'm still a redhead. A little background. I started making photographs way back in 1974 with a Spotmatic camera. I was eyeing this camera I found in a drugstore that cost $150, and I was about to turn 20. I called up my dad and said, I got 75 bucks. How about another 75 for the greatest birthday present ever? And he anteed up, and that was the beginning of my photography career. I received a BA in environmental conservation from the University of Colorado in 1976. I moved to Yosemite in 1977, so I've resided inside or just outside of Yosemite for 43 years. It's kind of hard to even say that out loud and believe it. I had the great honor of being a resident photographer at Ansel's gallery from 1980 through 1984. And Ansel passed away in 84, so during those last 4 years of his life, I did get to know Ansel, and was a phenomenal experience, as you might imagine. The Ansel Adams Gallery has represented my photography since 1983, and I was able to show Ansel a small portfolio of my work, and Ansel himself approved my photographs for sale at the gallery. And this is a badge of honor, I guess. Self-employed since 1984. I can't imagine doing anything else, but it's also has two sides to it. I can't imagine doing anything else, but it's also it's a hard way to make a living. And I've been a photographic author of 9 books. Besides Ansel being an influence, when I worked in Yosemite, Ansel conducted workshops every June, 2 one-week sessions, and he brought in photographers from all around the country, from all different types of photography. This photograph was taken in 1985 after Ansel passed away, but during one of his workshops, two of the instructors were huge influences on me. Jerry Ulsman, who's on the left, and then to the right of him is Ernst Haas, a huge influence on my photography. I'm over there on the right, and the photographer, a wonderful lady, Wanda Hemmerbeck, was another instructor in the workshop. So I had the wonderful privilege of meeting a lot of great photographers during my time in Yosemite, mostly during Ansel's workshops. So I call that period of time my master's degree in photography. Here's a photograph of me in Leidig Meadow in Yosemite. My main camera for about 20 years was this 4x5. It's a Wista metal field camera. I'm just going to run through some of the books I've done, just not to get into them in detail, but I did 3 books with the Exploratorium. The last one, most recent one, was Traces of Time. A monograph I did for Bullfinch Press, probably until recently, my favorite book, called Landscapes of the Spirit. The Color of Nature was another Exploratorium book. By the way, the Exploratorium is a hands-on science museum in San Francisco, and I worked with an amazing author named Pat Murphy, and we combined our efforts to use photographs and her words to illustrate principles of science and nature. My Yosemite book came out in 1994. My photographs and a powerful essay by Tim Palmer about how best to preserve Yosemite. The Tree was a book I did with the Nature Company, founded in Berkeley. The writing is by John Fowles, and I illustrated that text. And By Nature's Design was an Exploratorium book, and The Sense of Wonder was my first book, a wonderful essay about teaching children about nature, written by the great Rachel Carson. Okay, before we get started with the images, I'm going to try to keep moving along. These are lessons I'd like to, I kind of pulled out from the essays of the book. The book, by the way, is a collection of 60 essays that I wrote over 23 years as my column for Outdoor Photographer. But in preparing this seminar, I've tried to pull out the key lessons that I think come through in those essays and in the photographs. Prime directive is photograph what you love. And the journey itself, the process of discovery, the process of being in nature, of receiving the solace and the comfort of the beauty of nature is more important than the photographs themselves. One thing I realized early on in my photographic teaching is that a lot of people didn't believe they were artistic. And I was frustrated with that. And so for years when I taught group workshops, I started out with the question, what is the most important aspect of photography? And people would always chime in, you know, it's the light, it's the composition, that sort of thing. And rarely did people get what I thought was the right answer. And the answer is you, the photographer. The artist, I believe everybody has a unique perspective, and that once you believe it, your photography will improve. You realize you have that unique point of view. I write on several occasions in the book about focusing on themes. So photographing what you love is like finding your passion, and then you take that passion and make photographs, and then you start to build themes by finding what really drives you to photograph the most, and it allows you to best express yourself. By narrowing your focus, it's efficiency in terms of time. It's just, we're all scattered. We all like to photograph different things, but if you narrow yourself down a little bit, I think you'll find your photography improve more quickly. In teaching workshops, I've seen innumerable photographers have a one answer approach to a composition, to a scene. They'll set up their camera, take the photograph they think may be the best one, and then pick up and move. my advice is to, once you find something that inspires you to photograph, stick with it a bit. Explore your creative options. Try many variations. That can be your camera position, moving the camera left, right, up, or down, creating spaces between objects. That can be trying different shutter speeds, different effects you would have in a photographing water, for example. Another commandment is don't follow rules, trust your instincts. If you believe you're an artist and that you have a unique perspective, then let that come through more than what somebody told you is the specified way. Formulas block creativity. Related to the theme of solace, the solace of nature, for me, seeing the beauty of nature around me is a daily practice. And I do that most often around my home, especially during these pandemic times. Not going anywhere. Unfortunately, I live in a lovely section of the Sierra Nevada, and I have natural and some man-made things. I built a waterfall feature on my back porch, and I photograph it a lot. It's just something that keeps me fresh in terms of my vision, in terms of ideas. I watch the light. I watch the seasons, and your best options for improving your photography will be focusing on someplace at or near home where you can really truly get to know the light, the seasons, and know your subject as more than you can if you just photograph when you're out on vacation. And I'd like to leave you with this, that beauty surrounds us every day. And there's a lot of, the world's pretty messy these days, and seeing the beauty of nature is a tremendous ballast in my life and has been for a long time. It is comforting, it's reassuring, it helps me balance out the negative that we all experience at some point in our lives. Now I'll dive into the book. I'm going to kind of meander along and show you some of the photographs. I'm going to be showing you spreads of the actual book and then a little larger versions of the photographs. My opening chapter is sort of my artist statement, why I photograph. This photograph is my most important photograph. It's my favorite photograph. It has been a bestseller in terms of prints. And it's a photograph that was fairly unplanned. I was standing at on the shore of Lake Louise, hoping for some spectacular light on the glaciers. But those glaciers are hidden up in those clouds, and it just didn't happen for me. And I said, well, I got up early. I might as well try something. And so fairly unconsciously, subconsciously, I set up this composition. It was about a 2-minute exposure. And I was on a 3-week trip and didn't photograph. I didn't think about this photograph at all until I got the film back. And when I found this 4x5 chrome, I couldn't even remember where it was. It was not an experience that stuck in my mind. It wasn't a photograph I was waiting to see, but somehow all the years of experience before standing here led me to this composition, and sometimes things work when you just let go. I took two 4x5 sheets of film. One was vertical and one was horizontal. Not the best example of working your scene, but I wasn't sure what I had there until later. So fortunately, I made this frame. A lot of what I talk about in the book and my essays written over the years is about becoming creative and finding your unique perspective. This is a photograph of a alder tree and a granite boulder behind it in Yosemite. I first photographed it in 1984. Here's the original photograph I took. It's one of those photographs that to me fits the landscapes of the spirit category, where it's a bit mysterious. There's no sense of scale. The camouflage sort of effect with the lichen being on the tree and on the rocks. It just blew my mind away, and I had to photograph it. And as I showed in the previous photograph, I still go back there and see what I can do next with it. Something I talk about throughout the book, in this chapter in particular, is becoming a student of light. We all use light to navigate through the day. But as photographers, we have a special task to become students and never assume we know light, because we can always know it better. Something that is talked about a lot these days, the intimate landscape. It's something I've enjoyed doing tremendously for a long time. The intimate landscape is I think where my most personal vision comes through. This photograph was taken in the Smokies with a 4x5 camera, fairly long exposure, and fortunately the branches held still. But as I'll talk about in a little bit, backgrounds like moving water, blurred water like this can simplify the scene, and the blurred water allows those flowers, those branches and leaves to pop out. And living in Yosemite so long, I have endeavored from early on to try to see beyond the icons. So this photograph taken along the Merced River is an example of that. It's about a 2-minute exposure in the evening during high water. And it's an example of that kind of moody, mysterious scenes that I like to capture. Another example of sort of a moody photograph. This was taken earlier this year, actually, with 400 millimeter lens, and the focal length kind of compressed the view, and the mist coming off the meadow in the foreground adds a great mood and mystery to the image. You don't really see the ground, it's just mist. And in the same vein of the intimate landscape, what the road passes by is often more interesting to me than the icons. I was on my way to Yosemite Valley from here in Oakhurst and saw these ice formations and stopped for at least an hour photographing the ice and the oak tree. Another subject in common in photography, of course, is light, as we've talked about already. This is a photograph that shows the advantage of knowing a place, when to be there for the right light. This is a time of day when the wall is in shadow behind, and the sunlight comes through behind the leaves in the fall. Excuse me a moment. Maybe I should talk less and show photos more. A lot of photographers talk about the light, and that's their main attraction to taking photographs. And it is for me too. But I find sometimes people focus too much on the light and not about how they design a photograph. So to me, light and image design are equal partners. This photograph has, the proportions of land to sky, emphasizing the sky as much as possible. I created spaces in the between the trees and the island, so that the island is sitting out there and is a primary focal point. And where the light is coming, knowing when to be there at the right time. And probably my favorite light, though, is soft light. Rainy day, a cloudy day, especially for something like fall color. Forest details gives you that low contrast and intense color that I love to do. It's strongly influenced by Elliot Porter, and his photographs were often that kind of lush, soft light. Also in the book, I talk about a sense of scale. Just the size relationships makes a story to tell. This photograph is, largely focused on the small tree, but the sequoia, a small part of the base is shown and very little of the height is shown, but the size is conveyed by the comparison of the two. Here's a view from tunnel view with these very large pine trees, kind of dwarfed by the cliffs and by Bridalveil Falls. Like I said, composition is a critical element for me, and I like to use photographic composition like this, where I use the whole frame, the tapestry effect of a forest scene like this spreads the pattern across the frame. This chapter is about my impressionistic images, where I'm using camera motion with a single exposure. I'll talk about my interest in the process and my influences of impressionistic painting, but also talk a little bit about my technique. Fairly simple, really. I take a lot of pictures, moving the camera up and down and see what comes out. With a scene like this in Death Valley, I'm moving the camera laterally to left to right and back and forth to get that blurred effect. And here's another forest scene with moving the camera up and down. Designing a photograph, whether I'm using impressionistic techniques or a straight shot, I'm very intent on spacing in the image. That design fanatic that I am, I want to have the most interesting spacing between. If I'd moved left or right, this whole photograph would change, and it may well have fallen apart. This worked for me, and I try a lot of different compositions when I'm in a scene like this, whether it's a blurred shot or not. I found that a fair amount of my photographs have come while I'm doing projects. Like I was on a book project, The Color of Nature, or the Exploratorium, and we wanted to get pictures of turquoise lakes in Banff and Jasper, and also the ice cave that I've found in Jasper. So sometimes I've been able to make creative, artistic photographs while completing an assignment. As I mentioned at the beginning, my background, my degree is in environmental conservation. I've written a little essay about how you can best make a difference with your photography, and could be just helping to preserve a small park in your neighborhood or something on a larger scale. Apropos to this season, a little series I did on fall photographs. It's that idea of developing a theme. I collected images from various locations, mostly Yosemite, including these leaves in the Merced River, the elm tree in Cook's Meadow in Yosemite, and a sunrise scene at a lake in Vermont, right at the peak of fall color. Also, just pointing out in this chapter about using the edge of light, a lit subject with a dark background is often quite dramatic. This is my best known photograph of Yosemite, and that light with the sky dark and the half dome dark behind just highlights that wonderful shape of the elm tree. Again, shadows setting off the shapes of the cottonwood trees along the Merced River. Again, shadows, sunlit subject against shadows. Simplicity is a key in my approach to design, and I'm showing a few photographs here where a couple of them where fog is a key to the simplicity, kind of blurring out, fogging out the background, if you will, allowing the shapes of the trees to stand out more clearly. This is a little meadow right about a couple miles from here. This photograph just couldn't be made unless it was foggy. Although the lines are not simple, the fog does simplify it and gives you a mysterious feeling in this dense forest. Again, I spent a lot of energy trying to get the right spacing between objects, and did a lot of shuffling around here to get this image design, and I tried many more. The scene of Bridal Veil gives you a strong sense of the spray because the wall behind it is in shadow. Again, the Merced River is used, thrown out of focus, so that the dogwood branches stand out more dramatically. If I'd used a fast shutter speed here, it just wouldn't have worked at all. It would have been too chaotic. So I tell a little story about photographing the lava flows in Hawaii, and what an amazing experience that was, seeing the process of how the islands were formed to begin with. Portraying, as I said here in the title, portraying our evolving planet. The rule book says don't place something in the middle, and so I did, just to break those rules. Not really, I just tried various compositions. I aimed up, I aimed down, and the only composition that worked for me was straight down the middle. And so I'm glad I broke that rule. Oops, sorry. As I mentioned, the idea of developing themes is discussed in this chapter. And I talk about this photograph of this tree growing on top of this rock as one of my favorite tree photographs, and how it adds to my ongoing collection of kind of more intimate forest shots. Something I've been playing around a lot lately, where I'm taking advantage of the great sensors we have with the great latitude, 14, 15 stops. This was a fairly soft light, but I took a lot of density out of the shadows to make it a more high key image, pushing all the tones to the right on the histogram. Another photograph, just the capture came out with the branches were practically silhouetted, but I pulled open the shadows of the branches so those wonderful textures of the tree come through, and to create a light, more airy effect than I would have with a normal type of processing. Here I'm photographing the dogwood and the Merced River, and they're moving quite a bit. So it takes a lot of patience to get a photograph like this. So just the patience of sticking with the subject, and like I said earlier, working it thoroughly. Oftentimes when I'm at this location, people are there for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and I'm there for an hour. And I take a lot of photographs that have fuzzy branches, and usually eventually I get a sharp one. Another example is this photograph of horsetail falls taken in April. I could have pulled up there and taken one photograph, and the wind was so strong it was just blowing the mist everywhere. But instead, probably spent 30, 40 minutes just trying to capture all the variations and watching how much the waterfall changed, and it would fly up into the sky and it would shift to the left and right. It was quite a dynamic situation. And I could have taken one photograph and probably had a successful photograph, but I stuck with it, and just a few photographs can rise above the rest of them. I mentioned about photographing around home, and these are a couple of photographs I took actually inside my home. These leaves are elderberry leaves that fell on my front lawn, and I collected them and put them in a box and photographed them at home. So one way I mentioned to photograph more around home, you can find good subjects if you look hard enough, and keep your eyes fresh, keep in practice, so to speak. Another example of the same thing, a salsify seed that I found growing nearby and brought it in, and using something Harold would do is using a light box, and I photographed this salsify against a light box. And it's a process that gives me a lot of subject matter to photograph around my home by using that light box. And Harold will talk about that, I'm sure. I'm going a little slow here, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. This photograph is an example of persistence and going with the flow, so to speak, in that I was not sure what shutter speed I wanted to use, what would give me the best effect. I tried 4, 5, 6, 7 different shutter speeds and took several hundred images, and one image had this full heart shape to it out of several hundred. So that kind of craziness paid off. Persistence, if you will. Work your subject for the perfect photograph. This is the same waterfall with a completely different direction, with a very fast shutter speed, 1/1000th of a second. And I took a few hundred photographs of this waterfall and watching it jump up and down, and catching the right moments took a lot of frames. It's like photographing wildlife or sports or something. You rarely can do it in one shot. I'd like to leave you with a chapter I call the immersion course. And for me, that means immersion in Yosemite. But for you to do your best photography, consider immersing yourself in a place that inspires you, but also is close at hand, where you can learn the light, learn the seasons, and explore a place in depth. This photograph was taken on the way home from work. I worked at the Ansel Gallery and lived in El Portal, so I drove by this meadow 5 days a week for 5 years. And I just found this irresistible. I'd actually found this composition several years earlier. I'd photographed it with a 35mm camera before I had a 4x5, and then the best version was this, which was way back in 1984. I'm ending with a more recent photograph of my immersion course in Yosemite, my latest favorite photograph of the elm tree. And that's the end. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to just pop through a couple of slides here. I'm not going to talk too much about them, but if you can rewatch the video and you want to find out about my private workshops or my mentoring course, you can go to my website, portfolios.williamneill.com, Instagram. I hope you'll follow me on one of those social media platforms. And I think we'll probably talk more about the book later, so I'll just pop that up there for now. And also want to mention I'm offering a collector's edition of the book where I'm making prints, and you get a combination of the book and a print. Any one or all of these 9 photographs are available. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, very much for coming to this presentation. And particularly thank you, Bill, for presenting your wonderful work and great ideas about photography. I want to show a physical copy of his book, which here it is. And the inspiration for the title of this presentation comes from the dedication in his book, which is, besides to his family and to those who've supported Bill over the years, it is to the beauty of nature, which can be found around us every day, and for the comfort and solace that beauty provides. So I highly recommend his book. He has a discount code. It is LIGHT20, and we hope you will support either Bill by buying a collector's edition directly from him, or the publisher, Rocky Nook, where that discount code will get you, I believe, $20 off the price of the book. And perhaps Phyllis can put the link to the Rocky Nook page for Bill's book up into chat when she gets a chance, along with that discount code again, LIGHT20. As long as I'm doing show and tell, let me show and tell my book, A Creative Garden Photography, which is hot off the press. My understanding is that it arrived, the hard copies arrived in the warehouse last week, late last week, so it should be shipping soon. We have a discount code for it. I'll show it up on my screen at some point, which is Garden 40. And again, appreciate buying directly from the publisher rather than through that behemoth named after a great river that we all love and hate. I have a few remarks before I get started with my presentation itself, but I want to tell you that this is going to be a very different presentation than Bill's. I'm not, in fact, going to be emphasizing my book. We did a webinar with one of the publishers of the book a while back, which has details about what's in my book and everything else. And we're, that's not what I'm going to be doing this time. I am going to be reading some of my poetry while I show my images. Before I get started with that, let me share my screen without further ado or further ado. And before I get started on that, a couple of general remarks besides thanking Bill again for the synergy of showing his book at this time. First of all, nature, the solace of nature. Nature turns out to be a particularly odd word in some ways, because lots of things are nature. Arguably, all of us are nature. Nature is everything, and the nature of something is what the thing is. So the solace of nature, what is one really talking about? One is also talking about is nature wilderness, or is nature that which everything that's created and everything and the everything of being? So that's something that I wonder about sometimes. I also wonder, what is most important? Is it being someplace with one's camera, or is it being someplace and just, as Bill put it, having passion and loving about the place? Does that come first? I think for me it does. So one of my kids asked me, Dad, if you could only go to someplace and not take pictures, or if you could only take the pictures and not be there, which would you choose? It's sort of course, a hypothetical question because it's not a real dilemma. But because obviously you can't be at a place without taking photographs. You can't take photographs without being at a place, but I would take the being there. That's what's important to me. I also I stopped on this slide because the subtitle of my book, Making Great Photos of Flowers, Gardens, Landscapes, and the Beautiful World Around Us, is important. This is not just a book about photographing gardens. It's a book about taking the gardens inside, about landscape photography, about everything that's important to us. So, and I also want to point out that we have a previous book that Rocky Nook published, Creative Black and White, and that also has a discount code that is that is present. Phyllis, when you get a chance, could you put into the chat both the link to the previous webinar on my book on YouTube and also the our Rocky Nook links? That'd be great. No rush, though. Of course, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Also, I'm getting a couple chats saying that the Light 20 coupon is not working on Rocky Nook.
Okay, well, you know, basically they can email Rocky Nook and work that out. I'm sure Rocky Nook will find a way to oblige, but keep in mind that that coupon has to go in at checkout usually with Rocky Nook. So maybe that's the issue. I had someone who was trying to put it in earlier than checkout and it doesn't work. But let's take care of that offline. I'm sure Rocky Nook will be happy to honor it. I'm going to say from here on out, sit back, relax, enjoy the show, because that's what this is. And as an infamous Hobbit put it from The Lord of the Rings, again, I guess I have to quote, in that case, I have to quote the epigraph from my book, which is from the Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. Your land must be a realm of peace and content, and there must gardeners be in high honor. Well, that's somewhat debatable, but there you have it. I also want to say that with the slideshow going by, if people have specific questions about the technical origins or the location of any of my images, please ask me during the Q&A session. So this set of poetry that I'm going to read you, I wrote a number of years ago during a fairly difficult time in my life. And the distinction between nature and wilderness is an important part of what this poetry is about. The first one is called The Garden of Wilderness. The garden of wilderness was my heart's delight. Gray dawn met alpenglow in the long morning of deep rivers and distant mountains. Wind-swept timberline tarns, far away the machines and levers work. Alas, the mechanism must be mastered. All the law and order and social ranking, step by weary step down to the lowlands. So I came to leave the mountains. The next one is called Memory. The days spent on the trail fade in a flurry of miles as we speed parallel to the mountains on Route 395. All is forgotten in the exhilarating rush of dotted white lines and speeds not attained over months on foot. This compaction recalls memory, The terrain of years disappears, leaving only peaks and valleys. At first, I am startled by the jolt of civilization. Later, recalling the calm of alpine meadows, the last light on the tall peaks in the evening, I understand that these memories last longest. Looking at a map. A topographic map of the wilderness. The contour lines denote height and evoke distant valleys and mountains, leading by rivers to unknown forests, enchanted places all. Alone in the dismal city, watching gray snow fall, I envy cartographers and explorers of wild places. The sun on their backs, the morn on their faces, nights of bright stars and moon, the wild, wild wind, most of all. Back to the wilderness. When the gray spider web of the city wraps its filigree around my heart, and the subway roars in my naked ear, and the lonely cold does its part. When it's been so long that the stars go unseen, and I've forgotten to go out and walk, with phone calls and meetings and all this empty talk, it might be time to go back to the wilderness. The wind that will blow around me and the flowers that garland the trail will make living worthwhile and my days young again. And a final one. While we were in the wilderness, the sunset of humanity happened. We spent so long walking on the trail, sleeping under the star-encrusted sky, heeding the call of the marmot and water ouzel, that we forgot about everyone. So who knows precisely when it happened or what caused it? We simply came down from the mountains, empty stomachs and badly needing a hot bath, to find no one. This could easily be the future, we say, as we watch the sunset turn red, then to blue evening, distant valleys disappearing in the oncoming night. All right, so now that I have subjected a mass of wonderful photographers to some of my poetry, let's talk a little bit about photography. I do feel that writing is very important to my photography. Most of my photography books are things that I have written. I'm doing a webinar on how writing can help one's photography, and it's not just about writing to accompany one's photography. It's also about how working with words can make one a richer crafter of imagery. And I feel that's certainly been true for me. Also in my career, I've been a professional writer in the sense that I've earned my living as a writer for perhaps almost as long as I've been a professional photographer. These days, certainly I am more a photographer by living than a writer, but there were times in my life when it was the other way around. And I have also, as those who know much about my career know, have done other things besides photography and writing, perhaps to an extreme, and perhaps not as the poetry shows with happiness. The images that are going by on the screen here are largely lightbox work, which essentially means photographing with an extreme backlighting and using a bracketed sequence of imagery so that you, along with the backlight, you get the front of the image. With the image right here of a dandelion with the first light of dawn on the sparkling, you can see how crawling along on my belly in the dew with a camera on a tripod is part of what gives me joy and makes me think that there's more beyond me and a great world out there that's a wonderful thing to look about with flowers, and composition. One part of Bill's work that I admire and I think is incredibly significant is the simplicity of composition that matters. In other words, photography is essentially applied design between a frame. And when you look at an image, you're looking at something that's imposed order on a chaotic world. What is the order here? What is the soul of the photographer who is having a conversation with the viewer, and what is it about the world that one is trying to convey when one presents this image as an important thing? So often one wants to look for the edges of things, the edges of darkness and light, the edges of storm and clearing, or clearing and storm, when that storm first starts to come over, or when the water first starts to fall. What is it about falling water that moves us? We're going from the past, where the water is above, down to the future, where the water is below. And how is it that we can find the right balance of shutter speed against water, and the right balance of a close-up view against a further view, to try to make that distant horizon come to be something that's intimate for us in its mystery with the clouds and the sky and the wind and the wonderfulness that is truly this world? And how can we walk through days of rain in a forest with tree branches that may twist your ankle if you're not careful, and have water fall through one's poncho and one's coat till you're completely miserable and only worried about keeping the camera dry, and yet in the end find the opening of the sky to this most beautiful mist, with the moon rising over the mountains and the distant cars and the landscape going high up above, and the clouds with the lights of sunset looking down through the valleys at the places where the rivers flow through canyons, and the memory of noise that is made by artificial things is long forgotten as we remember our primal roots and where we came from, and how to enjoy the world and cherish the magnificence that is around us, and the wonderfulness that we all have in the world and in the people and in the things that can be made, and how we can preserve what we have and build slowly and carefully and make things so great and so wonderful again, where beauty is what matters and people matter, and materialism is not the most important be-all and end-all things, and have a vision for the future that is the future we would want to live in, and we would want our children to live in, and our children's children, and so on and so forth, and be in harmony with all that's out there and the magnificence that we've been given to be stewards of, with the stars and the earth and the other creatures on it, and all these things that we care about more than ever we know, and that are so magnificent and so worth seeking out and so worth cherishing. And on this note, I'm going to stop. I'm going to just fairly quickly go through what I have left here and come to my end, because I think I'm running a little over here. And put up a slide of my book, and there's the discount code. And there's Creative Garden Photography. I do really recommend the print and ebook bundle. By the time you get the 40% discount, it's $6 more for getting both. Recommended because the book is a beautifully produced book. We have the designer moderating this call, and it's a collaboration with the publisher that's been a wonderful publisher to work with. And but it's sometimes nice to have a reference book on your device as well. And I am going to turn this over as a panel discussion. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. And Phyllis, I did not look at chat at all while I was talking because I didn't. But I do know that that before I started talking, there were a lot of really great questions for Bill. Perhaps that might be a good place for us to start our discussion.
Well, there's two related questions, Bill. The first one from Jay was, are the photos in your book done with a 4x5 camera? And then Ronald asked, hi, Mr. Neill, are you still only shooting film? If also digital, what camera currently? Thanks.
I would say the book is about 50-50, 4x5 and digital. If you get the book and look in the back, you'll be able to see what camera was used. I used Canon digital cameras for quite a while, and currently I'm using a Sony A7R4 and love it. So I really cherish the time I used a 4x5, but I stopped using 4x5 and stopped using film in about 2005.
Bill, would you ever consider one of the medium format digitals?
Oh yeah, if one landed in my lap, sure.
I have to see what we can do about that.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, no, I've had students that are working with Fujis and other digital medium formats.
Phyllis, what's next?
All right, let's see. From Marcy, she asked, do you ever include people in your landscapes? Is part of your personal vision the feeling of isolation?
Was that to Bill or me or both of us?
To Bill. I'm still catching up on the Bill questions.
Yeah, not very often. You know, I've done a lot of photojournalism, believe it or not. I've photographed a lot in India and the Himalayas, and people are in the photographs everywhere. So in terms of my landscape and nature photography, very rarely. And the term of, you know, isolation wouldn't be what I would use. It's just what I choose to focus on as kind of a separating as a kind of a lone exploration of kind of a pure view of nature. It's certainly idealistic, and people are everywhere. And yes, I will try to keep people out of the photograph because I want that primal sense of raw nature. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but so in some situations, like travel photography, I'm certainly including people, but largely not.
Marcy says, yes, thanks.
Actually, that resonates for me too. I mean, I often find myself working to not have people in my photos, but as a separate body of my work, I do love photographing people, but it's entirely separate. I mean, partly because my nature photos are often intended to produce a sense of wilderness rather than nature per se. And you don't really like to see people littering or things like that in a beautiful environment. So yeah, sometimes I work very hard not to have people in some of the photos. I like Bill, I've also spent some time as a journalist, basically, and so there the goals and what one does are very, very different. Go ahead, Phyllis. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh no, that's quite okay. I'm catching up with. There's a lot going by in the chat here, and I am putting up right now in the chat. We are recording this webinar, and after some light editing, just we'll get it up on YouTube, on Harold's YouTube channel, so you can rewatch it, watch it anytime. So I'm just putting into the chat right now your YouTube channel link there, Harold. And there's a question for both of you. Do either of you use LensBaby? And if so, what lenses?
Bill, would you like me to take this one first?
I'll just quickly say that I have some LensBaby lenses, and I've never quite got into it. And I think they present a lot of options, but I haven't seen the latest products, so I will leave it to you from here on out.
So for me, I started out actually I went through a period quite a while ago when Lens Baby first came on the scene, probably 15 years ago or something like that, using a fair amount of Lens Babies. In fact, I worked with the company for a while, so I have a collection of their original products, many strong. And then I stopped. And then about 2 years ago, they came out with more lensy lenses, specifically the 85 millimeter 1.6 velvet and the 55 millimeter, I think 1.4 velvet macro lenses. And both of those are really interesting, cool lenses. The 85 velvet I use quite a bit for its as a special effect lens. I like walking around with it because it's kind of a weird thing and you don't know what it'll do, but it doesn't have this business that you can control the sweet spot. It's got a sweet spot in the center with the lens wide open. It's got a very selective focus feel. With stop down a bit, it is more like an old time lens put on a digital camera. I like the thing. It's cool. It's cool that it's a macro lens too. But you know, I do like playing with hardware. I think hardware for photography, and maybe Bill has a further comment on this because I'm going to open this up as a bit more of a general observation. Photography has two mothers or fathers, always has from the very beginning. One is the tinkerers, the people who came out of chemistry, who like building gadgets, and it's about the technology. The other is that it's an art and it's an aesthetic and it's something from the soul. And while I love the business of let me put a new lens on my camera and see what I can do with it and all that kind of thing, it's a trap to get too caught up in that, and that's not what photography is really about for me. What it's really about is an expression of my innermost being, and a way of connecting with the world, and a way of having dialogues with people, the people in question being the viewers of my images. Bill, would you want to comment on that?
I concur.
Good comment.
Just to go back in terms of Lens Baby, I have a Canon 90 millimeter tilt shift lens, and I use it a lot, and it focuses fairly close, but I can also put my extension tubes on it, and so it turns into a sort of a Lens Baby lens where I can shift it and change the focal point and throw, you know, certain areas out of focus as I use the tilt and shift, using wide apertures, and I have a couple of extension tubes so I can work at different magnifications as well.
Yeah, I have a comparable lens for the Nikon, which is my 85 millimeter tilt shift macro, a lens I use quite a bit. It's not in production anymore, but it is one cool lens.
Yeah, the elderberry leaves photograph I took, which is a square format, was taken with 2 frames using the shift function, you know, aiming straight down at the leaves and taking half the leaves and then the other half of the leaves, and it gives me a higher resolution file, and it's a way of kind of elevating the size at which that image could be reproduced.
Yeah, to answer a general question I just saw float by on the chat, a tilt shift lens, it mimics somewhat the operation of a bellows on a large format camera. It used to be, and what it allows you to do is change the perspective and direction of light to throw parts of an image that would otherwise be out of focus in focus, or vice versa, as Bill was saying, throw things that were in focus out of focus. It allows you to play a bit with the optical focus on a subject if you use the tilt shift functionality. Its most cliche use is with architecture, where if you're looking up at a building, the lines of perspective don't appear straight unless you apply an adjustment with something like a tilt shift.
I just see a question that came by for me about whether I do my own printing. Sorry to jump in here, Phyllis, but I just saw that. And yes, I've been doing my own printing for quite a while, mostly just digital. I never worked in the darkroom. Somebody asked about darkroom work. I worked briefly in Ansel's darkroom, printing Cibachrome back in the early 80s. And when I left the gallery, I used labs, and when digital printing came along, I started printing digitally in 1993 or 1994. So I've been doing that a long time. And I do use Canon printers currently, and I have a new 2200 Pro, which I just love. But I have two big print. I have a 44-inch printer in my studio as well as a 24-inch printer.
And to add to that, everyone go out and buy Bill's prints, please.
And Harold's.
Please.
Okay, Phyllis, over to you.
There you go. You just answered two of the questions that were on my list. It's perfect. Veronique would like to know, for both of you, do you spend a lot of time on post-production?
Bill, why don't you go on that one first?
It varies quite a bit. There are images that take me 10 minutes to process, and there are images that take me months to process, or years even. A few years ago, 3 years ago, I came out with a retrospective book, and it's 151 images in the book, and I opened up every one of them and found things I wanted to tweak. Just some of them I hadn't opened the files for 10, 15 years. And so the evolution to me is ongoing as far as processing goes. But just to, take a photograph and come home and process it, it's generally takes me several days of kind of coming and going to the image and before I get it where I like it. And like I said, some are easier than others, and some take me a while to figure out how I want to present the image.
So I would answer that by saying what Bill said. No, I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. Some images are pretty quick. Some images take me a long time, and some I come back to over a period of years. On the whole, I suspect that I do post-production probably more than Bill does. And in fact, there is a body of my work that is really about Photoshop compositing in the spirit, hopefully, of Jerry Ullsman. So I do some surreal work that obviously involves a fair amount of Photoshop. But I think all serious professional photographers spend time in post-production, and anybody who says they don't is not telling you the truth. There's quite a bit of difference in the amount and time people spend. I'm fairly heavy on post-production, but that's a trap too, because if you look at a picture, a photograph, and the viewer says, "Oh, that was photoshopped," then you've lost them in some sense, because they're going off on that tangent. The thing is, of course, a composite obviously has been photoshopped, so what I'm saying doesn't apply to a composite. But to a photograph of nature, if the first thing someone says looking at it is, "Oh, this has been overly manipulated in post-production," then you've lost the tranquil spirit of nature, and that's not good. Some of my images are pretty much right there. Others take a fair amount of processing. A great deal of my nature images are multi-shot. I use a tripod when I can. I'm a believer in photographing with a tripod. It gives you more options than photographing without a tripod, and makes you sort of take your time doing that.
They come out sharper.
They come out sharper too. Good point. Average for me is probably 3 hours. Shortest is a minute. Longest is about 10 years. So there you go. Big range. I also want I saw quickly going by a question about Ernst Haas. The Haas, I was fortunate enough to meet him a couple of times myself in his New York studio. My favorite Haas book on my shelf is Creation, but what I want to recommend is following the Ernst Haas estate Instagram feed, where a lot of interesting images get posted over time. And it's a good way to sort of get a feel for what he did. They're producing a book of his New York City photographs coming out pretty soon.
Yeah, The Creation was a seminal book for me. I saw it first when I was in college, and I picked it up at a used bookstore, and just the The use of the writing and the flow of the text, not to mention the images, was just blew my mind and been an inspiration ever since. But any book of Haas's is worth looking at.
All right, there's a question from Jennifer to both of you. What's one thing you have not photographed yet that's on your wish list?
Bill, you mind going first on that one? I need to think about it a second.
Well, one thing, I think a place is more than a thing. I mean, I haven't been to Greenland. I'd love to go to Greenland sometime. I mean, I'd like to get back to Tibet, where I have photographed. I'd like to get back to Hawaii and photograph the lava flows again. Gosh, that's a good question. I'm not coming up with many good options, but go ahead.
Okay, so I want to quote at you something Brian Peterson said at that conference that Bill and I were at in Yosemite in February, and that's that people should look for adjectives and adverbs, not nouns. So what I really want to photograph is love, cosmic compassion, the Platonic ideal of beauty, things like that. But on a more mundane fashion, I would love to follow Ernst Shackleton's path and photograph South Georgia Island.
Okay.
Very neat. Here's a question for Bill from Kim. How far do you move the camera to get your blurred images of trees and sand dunes?
Usually it's just a few inches. More often than not, I'm using my 70 to 200 zoom when I use that lens. Usually there's a area that I want to focus the motion on, and so I'm fairly constrained. It's say with a forest photograph, often the forest floor is a little too chaotic for me, and the sky is too bright. And so I'm often looking for a section of forest where I'm limited without those areas of distraction, just like I would do with a straight photograph. But then my motion is meant to contain that prime area and not run my motion into areas of distraction, like going up too high with a panning of a tree is you're going to bring sky into the capture, and that's often bright and distracting. Sometimes like I was in Big Sur a couple of weeks ago, I'm like moving left and right and panning, just from a pivot point, probably at least 12, 18 inches. And I just hold the shutter down and keep moving back and forth. So it's a spray and pray type of technique. I'm not expecting one shot to be the right answer. I take a lot of frames to try to get it's a sketching process, I guess, to back up and put it to the way I approach it. After spending years with a view camera where everything's slow and precise, pulling out a camera and taking it off the tripod and trying the impressionistic work is more like sketching, but often something comes through, and I look back at the back of the camera and see what's coming up and adjust shutter speeds or adjust the length of motion, like you're mentioning, based on what I'm seeing on the screen.
And here's a question for both of you guys. When photographing, what percentage are planned opposed to happen spontaneously?
I'll take that. I think 90+% are not planned. And what does planning mean though? So, if it's dogwood season in Yosemite, I plan to be up there. Do I plan a specific shot? Never. May I go back to some of the same places I've been to before? Yes. So in a general sense, that's planning. As far as using a photo app and finding the exact place to stand and locking myself into something like that, that's not how I work. I work to try to be an open page in the book, so to speak, where I'm going to a place at a general time of day or a time of season that might be fruitful, and then see what I respond to. I always find something exciting to photograph. I don't feel a need to plan some shot and overanalyze what I'm trying to get recorded. So it's much more fun and exciting for me to not plan and take what comes my way and see what I can get from it.
So I am pretty much on the same page as Bill about that. I like to say that fortune favors the prepared mind, which it certainly does. I like to prepare what I'm doing and to research where I'm going and what I am. But if you don't keep yourself open to chance and to serendipity and to keeping your mind open when you're at a place, you're probably going to miss the best things. The way I look at this is I like to give myself assignments. I take a quest. I'm going to go someplace. I'm going to go photograph Upper White River Falls, whatever the background here, and I'm going to try to be there at sunset and when spring water is high. So that's planning. But do I know what I'm going to photograph when I'm there? Probably not. You accept a quest. You're a knight errant accepting a quest. And yet, if there's something that calls out on the side, there's a dragon devouring a wonderful little village, you got to go and look at that dragon before you go on with your quest. So fortune favors the prepared mind. Do whatever research you can. Use a software app like Photo Pills or the Photographer's Ephemeris to find out where and when the sun is setting, rising, the moon course. Have your facts in mind, but then go with an open mind. To change the topic slightly radically, since I just saw this on the chat feed, Phyllis can put up the Rocky Nook link for buying my garden book again. But you know what? If you buy it from Amazon, that's fine with me too, as long as you buy it and write a great review with 12 stars. Can you do that? I'm happy.
Okay. Here's a question for Bill from Danielle. Is the photo behind you now the Hoh Rainforest?
It is in the same area. I'm totally blanking on the name of the rainforest. It's like one valley down from there. And I'm blanking on the name.
Not the Quinault by any chance?
Yeah, it's back up in there. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, it's Olympic National Park.
And here's a question for you both. How much gear do you carry when you go out?
Terrible question. I hate it. Bill, you want to do this one first?
I mean, speaking of being prepared, I carry everything I might want to use. So I just put everything in the pack. And so I just have a reasonable size pack that doesn't keep me from moving around, but has all my gear in it. So okay. I've run across this problem a lot with deciding what lens to use at a certain place, and I've experienced that when I lead my one-on-one classes in Yosemite. We stop at a turnout and someone will ask me what lens do I need, and my response is I don't know. I don't know what you'll see. I'm not specifying a certain type of photograph at a certain place. So I ask people to bring all the options that they can safely carry without falling over.
I think for me, this is a problem because it's hard to get it exactly right, and it depends what I'm doing. Look, if I'm loading up a car and I know that I'm going to be largely photographing out of my car, let's say in the backcountry of Death Valley or something, I'm going to take everything I think I might possibly want and creative options. On the other hand, if I'm going for a trip where I'm going to be carrying all my gear on my back for 2 weeks on the Camino de Santiago, I'm going to be very careful about traveling light. I think one thing that my days as a wilderness backpacker have really taught me is how to travel light. And that's a very different space from when you're going somewhere with options that you aren't carrying everything on your back. When I visited Son Doong in Vietnam, the great cave there were porters who carried the stuff. I know that's a very sort of colonialist way to look at things, but the amount of gear I'm going to schlep when someone else is carrying some of it is more than when I'm carrying it myself. There's also the question of, is there some special assignment or special reason for being here that's going to need a special lens? You know, I would rather be able to use a really heavy duty tripod, but because that produces better, sharper results, but I'm not going to carry a 20-pound tripod on my back for day after day. So I have a whole different sets of gear depending on what the context is, really. I enjoy using the Nikon 28 to 300 millimeter lens when I'm carrying a lot of things on my back, because that covers a multitude of sins. It's a well-designed lens that's optically decent at almost every setting and superb nowhere. So it doesn't hold up a candle to the Zeiss optics I use in my studio, but it certainly is better than carrying a lot of heavy glass with me. Interesting question where people have to work out their own compromises. I do like to say that the craft of the technical side of photography is a craft of trade-offs. Every decision you make has pluses and minuses, so choose wisely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've run through all the questions that have popped up in the chat now.
Okay, Bill, could you tell us a little more?
Just one sec. I see one I wanted to answer real quick.
Oh, yeah.
It's about doing tree photographs using camera motion. Do I start at the bottom or at the top? Which way do I go? And the question is, or the answer is that I just hold the shutter down and move up and down. So I don't even know which frame I was moving up or down. But I do have a very, you know, I get a feel of that constraint I was talking about. I don't want to go too high or low. So I work within those limits, up or down or left or right, depending on the image.
Bill, do you ever do that on the tripod?
Rarely. I do sometimes, but mostly not. It tends to be too linear for me. I like the handheld effect gives you a little bit more of a painting stroke. If you use a tripod and like you have a pan head and you just go up and down, the lines will be too straight for me. So I like the more painterly effect of handheld.
No, well, you really have a very nice deft touch on your in-camera motion. Lest anybody think that's easy, it's really not. And my experience of it is that I end up throwing away a lot of what I do when I do that myself.
There's a question for both you guys that has been reminded to me from William. He lives in Missouri and he's found Native American artifacts, and he's interested in how you would recommend setting up a photograph of axe heads, arrowheads, pottery shards, etc.
Well, I think I'll leave that to you, Harold.
I was going to leave it to you, Bill.
Oh,
I don't have it, you know, without seeing the subject matter, it's really hard to do an answer, but I think this is basically a studio photography question, and I think that it's going to depend what the purpose of the photography is. If this is documentary photography, then you want to make as straight and and as, you know, accurate a photograph as possible, with some kind of fairly neutral background and some kind of even lighting, and put the camera on a tripod and photograph them. On the other hand, if you're trying to make an artistic image from these things, and they're wonderful, beautiful things, then it's up to you. If I were looking for artistry here, I might put them on a black velvet background. I hope that helps a bit. It's probably really beyond the expertise of either Bill or myself. And what is also the case is you can't really give good advice about how to photograph something that when you don't know what it looks like. Fair answer, Bill?
Yeah, and I'll just add that I have a fairly large piece of black velvet, and that's, if you handed those artifacts to me, I'd put them on that velvet and use window light and photograph them.
And a couple of questions have been bumping down. I missed them because they were going by so fast. From Kelvin, Bill, do you shoot mono as well as color?
I shoot everything in color in terms of settings on my camera. So the conversion process to black and white is I may think about it while I'm taking the photograph, but the capture is in color, and then the conversion is in post-processing.
And also, Bill, here's a question from Jimmy. Your fall photography is very inspiring. For Yosemite and the Eastern Sierras, what time of year would you consider peak time for fall nature photography?
Well, Yosemite and the Eastern Sierra is fairly different time. In Yosemite, I usually run my fall workshops in late October and early November. So the lower elevations of Yosemite Valley, 4,000 feet, usually that is the prime time. Sometimes the maples are turning before that, maybe the third week in October. Generally in the Eastern Sierra, depends where, down toward Bishop, generally the middle weeks of October. Up around Mono Lake, it seems to be around the third week of October, often is a good time.
And Bill, there's two questions that are related. Christian would like to know, when you're indoors, do you use artificial light? And Kathleen would like to know, what lighting did you use on the elderberry leaves photo?
I use window light, and that's so I don't use artificial light. I have a dining room that has 2 windows, and I often take advantage of that depending on the time of day I'm working in there. So the elderberry light was taken, elderberry leaves were taken in with window light. I see the question about black velvet. Sometimes if I'm, depending on the subject, I'll hang, like I photographed calla flowers against a velvet background, and I just hung it up on a wall behind the flowers that were in a vase. Some things I put the velvet on the flat on a table or something, and try to find good window light for that.
And there's also a question for Bill from Greg. Do you use an action in Photoshop when going from color to black and white, or do you use Nik?
Neither. I use Lightroom, and I mostly use the controls in Lightroom for my black and white conversions. I don't use Nik. I mean, I've played with it, I have it, but I've been perfectly happy with what I can do. Sometimes some of the images do end up in Photoshop for local adjustments. Sometimes they're images that I did in color and see that they might work better in black and white, so I already have adjustment layers in Photoshop, so I will use Photoshop to just make a black and white adjustment layer on top of all the color adjustments. Does that help?
I think so. There was also a question earlier about how much has HDR been used in your photos, both of you. Has it been a game changer? And this person, T. Wong, finds it difficult to use and to implement.
Bill, you want to fly with that one?
I've played around with it a bit, and there's one photograph in the slideshow I gave of Yosemite Valley with black and white sweeping clouds through the center of the frame, and that was done with about 4 different frames using HDR soft photomatic software. Now that I have a Sony sensor, the sensors are so much better than when I took that photograph. I find I rarely need to. I do bracket quite a bit, as if I might need, this full range of exposure if the camera itself is not going to contain the contrast range of the scene, just to kind of give myself options later on. So I don't use it very much to answer your question, just once in a while.
So I use it quite a bit. HDR, high dynamic range photography. I want to draw a distinction between taking bracketed shots and running them through a piece of software like Photomatics that Bill mentioned, or Nick HDR, or the HDR functionality in Lightroom or Photoshop or Aurora, as opposed to taking different bracketed shots and blending them and using layers and masking, a process that I call hand HDR. So those are two different ways to extend dynamic range. As Bill said correctly, modern sensors have a greater dynamic range than they used to, so there's less need for it. But when it's possible, it's not always possible. When it's possible, I bracket all my photographs on a tripod. I don't always use more than one when I process them, but often I do. And often I will either put them through an automated HDR program or combine them into a hand HDR image and use bits and pieces from the different exposures. So yes, it has been a real game changer for me. And it's one of the great gifts that digital photography has given to us all. As somebody who started as a photographer in the film era, I can do things now that I could only imagine or dream about as a film photographer. So yeah, it is for me a game changer.
Oh, we got thanks for the response, fellas. And his name is Tony. So there you go. And I think we've made it to the end of the questions now.
Okay, Bill, would you please, could you tell us a little more about what it was like to work with and for Ansel Adams?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't really work for him. So I worked for his family at the Ansel Adams Gallery. The gallery is run by, was run when I was there by Ansel's daughter-in-law and owned by his son. And so through that family connection, I got to know Ansel, and I got to visit him at his home. I got to see quite a few workshops where he was presenting and other photographers that he brought in. Ansel was just very sociable character and just fun to be around. He was a workaholic. He worked 7 days a week, but 5 o'clock was when people would come by, cocktail hour, and he would have all kinds of guests come by. It could be a beginner photographer to a senator to other notable people. So I was there when he was doing an interview for Playboy, which was quite interesting, and got to spend time with him at his home and around him when he was up in Yosemite. So really the biggest inspiration really from Ansel is just his willingness to share his knowledge and his activism in an environmental sense. He was a habitual letter writer, and he would send letters off to congressmen or senators campaigning for various environmental causes. So that was pretty inspirational.
Great. Bill, it must be a real pleasure in your life to have spent so much time getting to know the area around Yosemite so intimately. It's a gift that not that many of us have had. Can you talk a little more about what Yosemite has meant to you in your life and work?
Oh man, in a lot of ways, it's been my primary teacher. So the fact of living near all that beauty and experiencing seasons, it's really been a sanctuary for me. It's a place I feel comfortable and safe. That's why I use that sanctuary in stone as a title for my Yosemite work. I think the lessons come from the simple things of learning a landscape, learning the seasons, learning the light. Where's the light going to be good today? Because there's no clouds and the sun is, high up above. Where can I find this place or that? Also, it taught me something that I could apply to other places where, I learned how to see beyond the icons, like I talked about in my presentation, just finding snippets of a landscape. My primary landscape lens is telephoto. It used to be my 70 to 200. Now it's my 100 to 400 Sony lens. And so I like not trying to describe everything in one photograph. So, you know, if you take a wide angle lens and walk around Yosemite and pull into the turnouts and take wide angle shots, you're going to have a lot of photographs that look like a lot of other photographs. So by exploring, you know, more intimately in terms of isolating sections of the landscape, and one section might inspire me and you might be inspired by something else. When we're standing at the same place, we have different interpretations of, you know, while we're standing in some iconic location.
Thank you. I'm inspired by your work, which is truly inspirational. So I'm going to give you a double-barreled question. Number one, do you have any questions for me? And number two, would you like to say some perhaps ultimate or penultimate words to all the photographers who are listening and watching this about how they can find inspiration themselves?
Double-barreled is right. Questions for you. Tell me about how you got started in photography. Here's
Geez.
the short version.
There is no short version, but I have done a webinar on this, and
I have to say something first. Long before I ever knew you, I bought one of your books. It was talking about how to sell posters, and I was barely. I wasn't even close to making a living at it, and so your books, you know, have been influential on me, and that's part of my question. You know, how did you get started teaching photography and writing books, because you're so prolific?
Well, thank you. I mean, my origin story with photography is that my parents gave me a Brownie camera, one of those box Brownie cameras, when I was 5 or 6, and I started taking pictures, and the whole process fascinated me. But my original career goals, first I wanted to be a writer, and then I wanted to be a painter, and I've been some of those in my life, along with being a computer programmer and a law school graduate and a technology executive and various other things. So
is that all?
That's all. Leaving out the summer jobs, a long and winding road is a short answer, and or a long answer. And in many ways, my writing has been bound up with my photography for me. But it's been wonderful for me to come back to photography in the digital era, and to be able to take the various skills that I've learned as a fine art painter and as a computer programmer, and bring both of them into this work that is something that is in fact a solace and is inspirationally largely about nature. And it's and always fresh. There's always something to explore and get carried away with photography. It's really hard to be bored if you're passionate about photography.
Yeah, and just you asked to kind of summarize things. I think my my little list that I showed in the beginning of the show is a good place to wind up too, where if you believe in your unique perspective, if you photograph what you love, if you soak in the beauty of nature, it gives to you endlessly. And don't just photograph on vacations. Practice seeing every day. Find things to photograph near you every day. If you have some fruit in the house, cut it up and put it on a light box. Or
you noticed that, did you?
Yeah, my question for you, this is my deepest question. Do you eat the food you photograph?
Well, sometimes, mostly not actually, because, you know, Phyllis and I look at each other and we say, this has been on the light box. It's all mungeyed. It's got whatever fluid we clean the light box with, and it's been sitting out there. So unfortunately, mostly it goes to waste.
Well, not artistically, but
yeah, but
has nutrients anyway.
Yeah.
So Harold, there's one more question that's popped in for you. Can you talk more about your professional writing?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to, first of all, refer to the webinar coming up that I have about writing and photography, and say that during the period in which I was not a photographer, from about 1990 to 2004, the only thing I photographed was my kids. I was, during a large part of that, making my living as a professional writer. I'm the author of 3 books about how Google tools work, a middle high school book about algebra, 3 or 4 books about how the art market works, a great many books about programming languages. I think I've lost track, but before I started writing books about photography, I was the author of probably 50 major published books, nonfiction. So, and I have a few novels in the drawers that have not been published, but that's really enough about that for me, because it's, I think in fairness, pick up creative garden photography, and I think you may understand where my writing comes from then, because I try to write in a very accessible but accurate style when it comes to something like photography. Accuracy is important to me, and so is being friendly in my writing. I don't want to put people off if I can help it. And I do have a secret weapon when it comes to writing about photography. My secret weapon is the person whose mellifluous voice is moderating this webinar, because the fact is that Phyllis is very much an editor and co-author of the photography books that I write. Thanks for the question. I want to add to this that my hope is that this webinar has given people a bit of a respite and solace from nature. My great thanks to Bill for collaborating with us, and congratulations on your beautiful, beautiful book and on a wonderful career.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Goodbye, everyone.
Hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Be creative and stay mighty.